They thought I was dead. A fireball of mangled metal and smoke said I was. My wife cried on television. Her lover moved into my house. And my company? They tried to steal that too. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't on that plane. And before I disappeared for good, I made all the proper preparations. I was watching, taking notes, waiting. And when I walked into that courtroom, alive, calm, holding the evidence they never saw coming, the only thing louder than the judge's gavel was the sound of an empire crumbling. This is an incredible story, and you need to hear it. There was a certain weight to the courtroom doors when I pushed them open, a heavy yoke, the kind you feel in your bones. They creaked a little as they swung, and for a split second, nobody turned. Then the bailiff looked up, saw me, and I swear time stopped. I didn't walk in like a ghost. I walked in like a man who never left, shoulders back, suit pressed, not a hair out of place. I'd shaved the beard 2 days ago. It made me look 10 years younger. No one had seen my face since the day I was supposed to have boarded that plane out of Denver. 3 months. That's how long they thought I was dead. 3 months since that little twin prop fell into the mountains in a storm. Wreckage scattered across a ravine. Fire, fuel, and a whole lot of guesswork. My name had been on the passenger list. My car was found at long-term parking. There wasn't much left of the wreck. No bodies recovered, just a pile of reasons to believe I was gone. And Lena had leaned into it. I'd seen the footage. Her crocodile tears, the careful hand on Dylan's arm as they stood in front of the house I'd bought, wearing grief like an expensive coat. Now here I was, alive, and on the record. I stepped into the room with the kind of calm that takes effort. The judge was mid-sentence, talking about asset divisions. My attorney, who'd known I was alive, of course, looked up at me, nodded once, then turned back to the judge. That's when it hit the crowd. A gasp from the gallery. Papers shuffled. Lena's face went white, and she grabbed Dylan's arm like she was about to collapse. He just stared at me, mouth half open, the blood draining from his face like a man seeing the dead. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I walked up the aisle with slow, even steps. People leaned out of the way. Whispers followed me, rustling like dry leaves in the breeze. I stopped in front of the bench, nodded to the bailiff, and handed him a thick, sealed envelope. For the judge, I said. Sensitive documentation. I believe it will clear a few things up. The judge peered over his glasses. He was an older man, stern but fair. He took the envelope, cracked the seal, and began reading. I turned to face Lena. She didn't speak. Her mouth was open just a bit, like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Her fingers dug into Dylan's wrist. His eyes flicked to the judge, to me, to the envelope, and then down to the table like maybe if he stopped looking, he could make it all go away. I cleared my throat. Sorry I'm late, I said, voice even, not loud, but it carried. I was preparing for this. Silence. Thick. Like you could scoop it up in handfuls. The judge lifted his gaze slowly, looking over the rim of the dossier, then stared at Lena for a long moment. Then Dylan. Then me. Mr. Mercer, he said, finally, it appears you are not only very much alive but also very well prepared. I gave him a polite nod. Yes, Your Honor. He gestured to the clerk. Reset the docket. We will proceed with Mr. Mercer present. There were no cheers. No outbursts. Just stunned silence and the low, rustling hum of paperwork and breathless whispers. I took my seat beside my lawyer. Across from me, Lena didn't move. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, but she just kept staring at me like she was trying to blink herself awake. I didn't blink back. She wore a pearl necklace I'd given her on our 5th anniversary. Funny what people cling to. Dylan had a folder in front of him that looked suspiciously like a pitch, probably for the company he thought he'd be running soon. I almost smiled. But I didn't. There was nothing to smile about yet. Instead, I sat still. Let the moment stretch. Let the air settle. The real work hadn't even begun. But I was here. Alive. And ready. It started with little things. I'm not the suspicious type. Never have been. I've always believed that trust's not something you ration. It's something you give fully, or not at all. That's how I treated Lena. For 12 years, I never questioned where she was, who she was with, or why her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. I had no reason to. Until I did. One Thursday morning, I sat down with my second cup of coffee, logging into the company accounts like I always did before meetings. That's when I noticed a transfer I didn't recognize, just under the reporting threshold, spread across 3 transactions. Not big enough to raise red flags automatically, but strange enough to make me double back. They were marked as consultant payments. We didn't have any new consultants. I flagged it for follow-up, sent myself a reminder, then went about the rest of the day. Didn't even mention it to Lena. She didn't work at my company, and I figured it was probably just some mix-up with accounting. But something about it stuck in the back of my mind, like a splinter under the skin. Then came the late nights. Lena had always worked hard. She ran logistics for a regional firm, and that kind of work doesn't come with neat hours. But the pattern changed. She stopped texting when she was staying late, started coming home at odd hours. One night she told me she was catching dinner with coworkers, but came back smelling like cheap hotel soap and expensive wine. She said they went to a place across town. I checked the restaurant's hours online. They closed 2 hours before she got home. I didn't say anything, just nodded, poured her a glass of water, and said I was heading to bed. I laid awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above me. Then came Dylan. He and I had built the company together, brick by brick. I trusted him like a brother. There wasn't a decision I made without his input. He was sharp, loyal, or so I thought. But lately, he'd changed. Started pushing strange ideas in board meetings. Talking in riddles. Pitching riskier ventures with thin returns. Then one morning, he called out of the blue and asked for a copy of our internal valuations. Not just the quarterly reports. He wanted the proprietary data, client contracts, patent roadmaps, supplier breakdowns. Stuff we kept under lock and key. I asked why. He gave me a line about a potential investor who needed full transparency. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't. Instead, I started looking deeper. I kept it quiet, even from my own staff. I went over Lena's expenses, Dylan's internal messages, and the company records going back 6 months. I used a second phone, burner laptop. I even started checking Lena's location history when she left her phone on the kitchen counter. The pieces started falling together. There were lunches that overlapped, appointments that matched, transfers sent on days they just happened to be at the same networking events. I found a shared Dropbox folder hidden behind a layer of dummy files. Inside it were spreadsheets, scanned receipts, and an internal company memo I had written, one that had never been shared outside of our executive cloud. Only 2 people had access to that document. Me and Dylan. I sat there in my office, the lights off, the sun going down behind me, and stared at the screen. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was disappointed in a way that sat deep in my chest, heavy and slow. They weren't just cheating on me as a husband or a friend. They were cutting me out of my own life. I knew then that this wasn't something I could yell my way out of. There wasn't a confrontation that would fix it. If I called them out, they'd cover their tracks. Deny it. Gaslight me. Maybe even flip the story to make it look like I had lost my grip. So I didn't confront them. I watched. And I waited. I let them think they were winning. Because some betrayals aren't answered with fists. Some are answered with fire. The idea came to me while I was shaving. I was standing in front of the mirror, dragging the razor across my chin, thinking about how Lena smiled when she lied to me. I'd caught her in 3 different stories that week. Small things, where she had lunch, why she left early, what time she got home. The lies weren't even well thought out. She didn't think I was paying attention. And she was mostly right. Until now. I finished shaving, wiped my face, and stared at my reflection. I looked tired. Older than 45. But under all that, I still had a fire. And it hit me. If I wanted to get out clean, I had to vanish completely. Not move to another city. Not fake a business trip. No, I had to disappear the way a good magician does, right in front of them. The first piece fell into place the next morning. One of the interns at my company, a wiry kid named Tyler, was sitting outside the break room tapping away at his laptop. He reminded me of myself at that age, overworked, broke, and trying to make a name for himself in a building full of people twice his age. I offered to buy him coffee. We sat outside on a bench near the loading dock. I made it sound casual, like I was offering him freelance work. I told him I needed someone to take a business trip in my place, fly out of Denver on a company ticket, check into a hotel, and send a few scheduled emails using a template I'd written. A little cloak and dagger, I joked. He hesitated. Then I mentioned a $5,000 bonus, no questions asked. He asked how soon he needed to pack. The next piece was the flight. I used my points to book a one-way ticket out of Denver under my name, scheduled for a stormy Thursday afternoon. Then I booked a second flight for myself, using a fake identity and an alias I'd created years earlier when I was consulting in South America. I'd kept the ID and burner phone all this time, not really knowing why. Now I knew. I gave Tyler my travel bag, wallet, ID, company badge. Even wore one of my signature coats so people would remember it. I instructed him to board the plane, text me once he was buckled in, and then follow the script I'd written for the next 72 hours. I never got that text. The plane went down somewhere in the Rockies. Bad weather. Mechanical failure. No survivors. The next morning, the news broke. Local businessman Colin Mercer believed dead in crash. My face flashed across the screen. Friends left voicemails. Family called the office. Lena, well, she gave a statement. She was wearing black and holding Dylan's hand. Said she was devastated. I was watching it all from a dry, dusty living room in a cabin I hadn't visited in 6 years. Middle of nowhere. Up near Flathead Lake in Montana. No cell towers. Just old copper wire phone lines and a satellite link I'd paid to keep active for emergencies. It was quiet. Cold at night. But it was mine. I didn't sit around licking wounds. I got to work. The next day, I called in a favor from a man named Hal Becker. Retired cop. Worked as a PI down in Wyoming. We'd met during a fraud case a few years back. He had an eye for detail and a gift for staying invisible. I told him I needed eyes on 2 people, Lena and Dylan. He didn't ask why. Hal drove into town the next day and started snapping pictures. He set up dummy accounts to track their online activity. He pinged me once a day, using a secure email I accessed through a VPN. Each message was blunt and clean. Timestamped photos. Notes. Account changes. Meetings. Turns out Lena and Dylan wasted no time. They were at the bank within a week. She'd already filed a claim to access our joint assets, citing unforeseen tragedy. Dylan submitted paperwork to assume my proxy vote on company board decisions. They acted like they had nothing to hide. Like the body wasn't even cold. That part didn't surprise me. I watched them from house photos. Screen after screen. They smiled, drank wine, and hosted meetings like they were the new power couple in town. But I wasn't gone. And they weren't ready for what came next. From the outside, it probably looked like Lena and Dylan were living the dream. They moved into my house 2 weeks after the crash. Not our house, my house. I bought the land, designed the layout, even picked out the stone for the fireplace myself. I had plans to grow old there. Maybe take up woodworking in the garage once I stepped away from the company. Raise chickens, maybe. Never happened. Instead, Dylan was sitting in my leather chair drinking from the coffee mug Lena had custom-made for our 10th anniversary. I knew because I saw the photo in Hal's report. She captioned it, "Finally feels like home." That line stayed with me. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it told me exactly how they saw things. They weren't waiting for the dust to settle. They thought it was settled. That meant they'd get sloppy, comfortable, predictable. And that's when a plan like mine has the best chance of working. While they were picking out throw pillows and pouring wine on my deck, I was setting everything in motion. Every late night I had in that cabin, every page I read, every login I checked, it all added up to a single mission. Take back what was mine. First, I pulled out the charter documents from the company. Everything Dylan and I built had been structured under a holding corporation. We'd both agreed on a 2-signature rule for major moves, but Dylan had found a loophole, a dormant clause buried in the founding agreement that let either partner act alone in the event of the other's death. It was meant for safety. Now it was being used for theft. So I went one layer deeper. A few years back, I'd quietly moved some of the IP and client contracts into a shell company in Delaware, one that only I had authority over. I'd done it during a round of audits when we were tightening up security. At the time, it was just about protection. Now, it was my ace in the hole. I logged into the registry and shifted full rights back into my name. Then I locked it down behind new legal shielding, trust entities, fresh articles of incorporation, new board signatures. All squeaky clean. All legal. And all mine. Next was the house. That one hurt a little. I'd spent years turning it into something warm and lived in. But I knew Lena wouldn't have moved in so quickly unless she believed she had a claim to it. Technically, she did. We were still married on paper, and the deed was joint. But what she didn't know was that I'd refinanced the property months earlier to pull capital for a now-defunct expansion. And I'd done it through a lender who tied asset control to living occupancy. The fine print said that if I were to die or become incapacitated, any changes to residence or ownership would require a 90-day estate review. Until then, no alterations were allowed. They'd triggered the clause the second they moved in. I called the lender from a burner line and asked them to initiate a quiet freeze on any title changes. They didn't question it. The paperwork backed me up. Then I went after the accounts. We had 3 joint accounts, 2 business, 1 personal. Lena had already drained the personal one halfway, which I expected. What she didn't know was that I'd left an automatic fraud alert in place tied to that account years ago after an unrelated phishing attempt. Anytime a withdrawal over $10,000 came from an unrecognized device, it kicked off a review. That happened the moment she tried to move money into her name. By the time her bank flagged it, I had already rerouted the remaining funds into a trust under my brother's name. He didn't know it yet, and I'd never needed to do it before, but the structure was airtight. As for the business funds, Dylan's fingerprints were all over the movement history. He was making transactions that looked legitimate, vendor fees, equipment purchases, but Hal had already traced those invoices. Fake companies. Shell vendors. Names that traced back to P.O. boxes registered in New Mexico and Nevada. I printed it all, logged it, timestamped it. By the end of the month, I had enough documentation to line a courtroom wall. And still, they didn't suspect a thing. Lena posted a photo of herself in the garden. She was wearing my old flannel and sunglasses she once swore were too flashy. Dylan commented underneath with 3 red hearts and a champagne emoji. It was surreal, watching them decorate a future build on lies. But I didn't let it shake me. They thought they were safe. But the floorboards were hollow, and I was nearly finished cutting the fuse. They set the hearing for 9:30 a.m. sharp on a Monday, room 6B at the county courthouse downtown. Lena had filed for expedited asset control under the presumed death clause, citing legal hardship and financial urgency. I read the filing myself. She even said she couldn't keep the business afloat without access to our shared holdings. What she meant was, she wanted to cash out before questions started piling up. I'd been gone just over 3 months. That was the minimum period for estate hearings under circumstances like mine. Since no body had been recovered from the crash, and no official death certificate had been issued yet, the court had allowed Lena to argue for provisional access, pending full confirmation. Her lawyers had pushed hard. They figured they had momentum, and I'd let them believe it. That morning, I got dressed in silence. Dark gray suit, crisp shirt, blue tie, Lena's favorite, once upon a time. I'd lost some weight during my time away. My face was leaner, jaw more defined, eyes a little more hollow. I'd let go of everything except focus. That had been my fuel. The courthouse steps felt colder than I remembered. I didn't enter through the main door. My lawyer, Michael Brandt, had arranged for me to come in through the south entrance, an old access route used by staff and attorneys. We didn't want to risk a hallway run-in. Not yet. Brandt was already waiting outside the room. He gave me a nod, handed me the folder I'd prepared, and said, "They're in there." She's smiling. I nodded. She won't be. We stepped through the door at exactly 9:37 a.m. The judge was already on the bench. Papers rustled. Lena sat 2 rows up, flanked by her attorney and Dylan, who wore a tan suit 2 sizes too small and a smug expression that turned to stone when he saw me. Lena's back stiffened. I watched her knuckles go white around her pen. Brandt cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, Colin Mercer, is present and ready to participate in these proceedings." The judge looked up. He blinked twice, then leaned forward slightly, brow creased. "Mr. Mercer?" he asked. "In the flesh, sir," I said, stepping forward and handing the bailiff the folder. The room fell silent. One of the court clerks dropped her pen. A man in the back row whispered, "That's him." I didn't look at Lena. Not yet. The judge opened the folder. Inside was a full ledger, financial records, correspondence, property transfers, and a signed affidavit from my private investigator, Hal Becker, detailing everything Lena and Dylan had done in my absence. There were photos, emails, bank trails, even a screenshot of a message Dylan had sent to a known shell company with instructions on how to invoice my firm under a fake vendor name. The judge read in silence. Lena didn't speak. Neither did Dylan. Their attorney leaned over and whispered something urgently. She nodded once, then looked at me. Her face had gone pale. Not afraid, just hollow, like someone who realized too late the house was already burning. I finally met her eyes. She mouthed something might have been Colin, or please. I didn't respond. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said after a long pause, "it appears you've brought significant evidence to bear on these matters. Are you prepared to offer testimony?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "And you understand this is not just a probate issue now. There may be cause for civil or even criminal investigation." "I understand." Lena's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, this is unexpected. My client has been operating in good faith, under the presumption of death." The judge cut him off. "Counselor, If your client was unaware of these actions, she'll have the opportunity to clarify. But the court must consider the documents presented. He turned back to me. Mr. Mercer, do you have a statement? I stepped up, not because I had to, but because I wanted to make one thing perfectly clear. I looked straight at Lena, then Dylan, then back at the judge. While I was presumed dead, I began. My wife and my business partner moved into my home, attempted to assume control of my company, and began liquidating joint assets. I have documented evidence that these actions were deliberate, calculated, and coordinated. I did not disappear without reason. I disappeared to protect what I had built. And today, I'm here to reclaim it. That was it. No yelling. No threats. Just truth in full daylight. The judge nodded, then set the folder down carefully. Very well, he said. The court recognizes Mr. Mercer's return. All estate proceedings are hereby paused, and further review is scheduled immediately. Counsel will reconvene with new motions on record. The gavel dropped. Lena didn't look up again. By Wednesday, the hearing had shifted from probate to something else entirely. The judge called it a reassessment of marital and corporate integrity. I called it the beginning of the reckoning. That morning, I arrived early. The courtroom was quieter than Monday. Word had spread about my return, and the curiosity crowd had thinned. No more whispered gasps, no stolen glances from the gallery. Just Lena, Dylan, their attorneys, and my team. Lena wore black again. Maybe she thought it softened things. Dylan looked like he hadn't slept, eyes red, jaw clenched. He kept checking his phone, tapping nervously at the screen, like maybe a miracle would show up in his inbox and make this all go away. It wouldn't. The judge opened the session by reviewing the contents of the folder I'd submitted. He had gone through most of it already, but now it was time to put it all on record. Mr. Mercer, he said, you claim the respondents colluded to commit financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and deliberate misrepresentation under both civil and corporate law. Do you have additional evidence beyond what has been submitted? I do, Your Honor, I said, standing. 3 exhibits. He nodded. Proceed. I reached into my case and pulled out a flash drive. Exhibit A, I said, handing it to the bailiff. Audio recordings of private conversations between Dylan Reyes and outside business representatives from Shelby Dynamics, dated 7 weeks before the presumed death filing. The judge raised an eyebrow. You recorded Mr. Reyes? No, sir. The recordings were legally obtained through a third party. Mr. Reyes met with a representative at a restaurant known for having wired security audio for liability reasons. My investigator recovered the timestamped feed with permission. We played the clips on the courtroom monitor. Dylan's voice came through clearly. Once Colin's out of the picture, we'll move the supplier contracts. Shelby gets the East Coast accounts, and I'll transition into the CTO seat after Lena files. He paused, laughing. She'll cry on camera. Public eats it up. By Q3, we'll have controlling stake. Lena didn't look up. Her hands were folded tight, white at the knuckles. Dylan sat frozen. Exhibit B, I said, handing over a folder. Email exchanges between Mr. Reyes and the Shelby Dynamics recruiter. Inside is an offer letter from Shelby dated 4 days before my plane crash. It outlines a signing bonus, plus equity, contingent on one thing, assuming my position at Mercer Lane Holdings. The judge flipped through the papers. You could hear the pages rasp under his fingers. Was the offer accepted? I nodded. It was signed, scanned, and returned electronically. I have the digital timestamp and IP trail. My team verified it. He turned to Dylan. Mr. Reyes, do you contest this? Dylan didn't speak. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Dylan shook his head slowly. It looked like his shoulders shrank right there in the chair. Exhibit C, I said, voice steady. The Shelby job wasn't real. That got their attention. It was part of a controlled sting, coordinated between myself and 2 former employees of Shelby Dynamics, now independent consultants. The job didn't exist. The recruiter was an actor. The documents were created to see how far Mr. Reyes would go. Every interaction was recorded, audio, email, and in person. The judge sat back. So you created a false opportunity to expose potential misconduct? Yes, sir. And you did so before the court was made aware you were alive? Correct. At the time, I was presumed dead. I needed to gather as much information as I could before stepping back into the legal process. The courtroom fell into a hush. I glanced at Lena. She wasn't blinking, not crying, just staring ahead like a person who knew the tide had turned too far to swim back. The judge sighed, closing the folder. I've seen enough, he said. This court finds significant cause to proceed with a formal review of fraudulent conduct, corporate subterfuge, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. He looked at both of them. Mr. Reyes, the court may refer your actions to the State Attorney General for review. Ms. Mercer, your role in these matters will be subject to examination, and any claims you've made under joint property or corporate stake will be frozen pending resolution. He turned back to me. Mr. Mercer, the court recognizes your claim of undue harm and breach of trust. You may proceed with the civil case. Dylan rubbed his face, muttered something I couldn't hear. Lena sat still as stone. And just like that, the foundation cracked. They didn't just lose the upper hand. They lost the ground beneath their feet. It took less than 30 minutes for the judge to deliver the ruling. He didn't draw it out. There was no dramatic speech, no raised voice or threats of contempt. Just calm, precise language that carried more weight than any shouting ever could. The courtroom was dead quiet except for the shuffle of paper and the occasional creak of a chair as people shifted in their seats. The court finds in favor of Mr. Colin Mercer, the judge said, peering over the rim of his glasses. Based on submitted evidence, it is determined that the respondents knowingly engaged in financial misconduct, attempted corporate fraud, and acted in breach of both marital trust and binding legal agreements. He paused and turned toward Lena and her lawyer. Furthermore, based on the prenuptial agreement signed and notarized on August 16, 2010, this court recognizes the clause stating that any extramarital collusion or financial manipulation nullifies spousal claims to shared business equity, property rights beyond cohabitation, and ongoing financial support. He tapped the page with his finger. Given the documentation provided, Ms. Mercer's claims are hereby dismissed. She is not entitled to alimony, business shares, or personal assets acquired post-marriage. Lena didn't even flinch. Her eyes were blank. Gone was the smugness, the over-rehearsed grief she wore like a mask in that first hearing. Now she looked like someone who'd just watched a house cave in from the inside. The judge turned to Dylan. As for Mr. Reyes, he continued, this court cannot rule on criminal matters, but we are submitting findings to the district attorney for potential charges related to corporate misconduct, unlawful disclosure of proprietary information, and attempted embezzlement. Dylan's lawyer stood, face pale as plaster. Your Honor, we request to make a statement for mitigation. You'll have your chance, the judge interrupted. But not here. This is a civil court. You'll need to take it up with the appropriate authorities. I sat still through the whole thing. No smile. No gloating. I just listened, letting each word settle like dust after a demolition. I hadn't come for revenge. I came for clarity. And now it was here. Lena's lawyer quietly turned and began packing his files. I watched him as he leaned in and whispered something to her. She gave a small nod, then looked straight ahead again. The lawyer stood up and addressed the court. Your Honor, due to recent developments, my firm is withdrawing representation for Ms. Mercer, effective immediately. There was no protest. No last plea. The judge nodded. Acknowledged. Ms. Mercer, you will need to seek new counsel for any future proceedings. She didn't answer. Afterward, outside the courtroom, a few reporters loitered by the marble columns. I'd kept things quiet until now, but there was no hiding it anymore. This was the kind of story that gets picked up. Successful CEO returns from the dead to expose fraud, betrayal, and corporate theft. I heard one guy whisper, he's the one. That's Mercer. I kept walking. Michael Brandt, my attorney, caught up with me on the steps. It's done, he said, pulling off his glasses to wipe them. Cleanest ruling I've seen in a long time. You want to go for damages, you could make it even cleaner. I shook my head. No, this was enough. He nodded. I'll make sure the company assets are refiled under your name by the end of the week. Appreciate it. He paused, then said quietly, You sure you're okay? I didn't answer right away. I'll be fine, I said. Eventually. Behind us, I could hear the doors swing open. Footsteps, heels clicking fast. Lena. She walked past without looking at me. Her face was unreadable. She didn't stop. Didn't speak. Just walked down those courthouse steps like she was still trying to convince herself she had somewhere to go. Dylan wasn't with her. He came out minutes later, face flushed, whispering furiously into his phone. Probably his lawyer. Probably trying to figure out how to hold on to whatever pieces he had left. His eyes met mine for a moment. He looked away first. I didn't say a word. Back home, I stood in the middle of the living room for a while. The one they thought they'd taken. It smelled like dust and old wood and memory. I hadn't changed anything since I left. My coat was still hanging by the door. The fireplace still had the last log I'd thrown in. I stood there for a long time, not thinking, not feeling, just breathing. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was playing defense. The storm had passed, and they were the ones standing in the wreckage. I didn't say a word to anyone when I walked out of the courthouse that day. No press conference. No gloating. No standing at the top of the steps like I just won a trophy. I just walked, quiet, steady, the same way I came in. The truth is, it didn't feel like a win. Just like something heavy had been set down. Not gone. Just no longer mine to carry. I drove north with no real plan. Stopped in small towns when I needed to. Ate bad diner food. Watched sunsets roll across empty fields. After a week, I found a place called Windmere. Population under 1,000. It had a general store, a mechanic who only took cash, and a town hall that looked like it hadn't seen a full meeting in years. I bought an old farmhouse outside of town. Needed a roof. Floors creaked in half the rooms. But the porch faced west, and I could see the mountains if I stood on the back step and squinted past the tree line. That was enough. I spent the year fixing it. No contractors. Just me, a toolbox, and time. I let my hair grow out. Took up early mornings and coffee on the porch. For once, I wasn't rushing toward anything. Just letting life move around me instead of trying to control it. A year to the day after the ruling, I got a visitor. It was Lena. She found me somehow. Don't know if it was through Brant or someone in town, but there she was, standing at the gate in a raincoat, holding a paper cup of coffee and looking older than I remembered. Not tired. Just worn. I didn't come to fight, she said. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. She told me she'd been going to therapy. Said she understood now what she'd lost. That Dylan had used her, and she let it happen. She asked if we could talk. Start fresh. Maybe just a dinner. No pressure. I listened. I even believed some of it. But forgiveness doesn't mean restoration. I told her I hoped she found peace, but I was already building something else. She cried a little, thanked me for listening, then left the same way she came, quiet, with the sound of gravel under her heels. As for Dylan, the fraud trial wrapped up 6 months earlier. Turns out the fake vendors, the forged invoices, the signed job offer from a company that didn't exist, those things don't play well in front of a jury. He was sentenced to 3 years. White-collar time, sure. But time is time. His reputation was done. Last I heard, he was doing compliance training videos for a consulting firm in Nevada. Don't know if he's learned anything. Don't care much either. Back here in Windmere, I planted a garden. Raised beds, nothing fancy. Tomatoes, peppers, some beans. A neighbor gave me chickens. I fix fences, volunteer at the firehouse, and keep my business small and clean. People still ask if I'll ever go back to the city. Start over in some bigger way. But I'm already started. Some stories end with fire. Mine ended with dirt, sky, and enough time to grow something honest. That's enough for me. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Dylan deserve a longer sentence, or was justice served? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.